All right, guys, as promised, we do welcome in CBS Sports college basketball insider, Jon Rothstein, who, as we know, just like Mick Foley at the WWF King of the Ring 1998 in Stetson's first round game against UConn, you have been surviving and advancing this summer, John, as the parent of a 1-year-old. Give us an update. How's it going?
It's like Stallone and Rambo 2. It's day to day, guys. I don't know if you guys are parents or fathers, but you think every single day that you're just going to get to the finish line and then press a reset and it's going to get easier. But that is not the case. Our daughter is great. Life has never been better with her in it. But you want to do research on obviously a mid-major team. You want to think about how many SEC teams can be in a position to get at-large berths to the NCAA tournament. If she needs a diaper change, that task needs to be put on hold for a couple minutes.
Yes, John. As a father of a 2-year-old, let me tell you, it gets even more chaotic at times.
There you go.
But there we go. All right, let's talk about these SEC teams because obviously starting with Alabama, we talked about it. They make the Final Four run last year. They get Sears back. They get Nelson back. They get more of these, dynamic pieces back in place. And then, oh, by the way, they add Big Cliff. They add Chris Youngblood and, Reed and everyone. Your expectations just for this Alabama team heading into this season, for a lot of us, we've talked about if you're going to have the biggest threat to UConn for the three-peat outside of just roster subtractions for the Huskies, the Tide may be the team to do it.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any question that this should be the most anticipated season in the history of Alabama's basketball program. And look, I have been a big advocate of this, and I think it's the utmost truth when you look at the teams that went the furthest in the NCAA tournament last year, UConn and Purdue. Returning personnel is significantly more important than incoming personnel when you look at the teams that have the highest success in college basketball. You referenced it. Mark Sears is back for Alabama. You referenced it. Grant Nelson is back for Alabama. But on top of that, Alabama also returns Jaron Stevenson, who, as we remember, was integral in that Elite Eight win over Clemson. The Crimson Tide probably don't go to the Final Four without him. They also return Latrell Wrightsell, who, when he scored in double figures last year, Alabama was a perfect 10-0. So I think first you need to look at what's returning. You have to like what's returning if you're thinking about the team in Tuscaloosa. And then I also think you make a great point in terms of referencing Big Cliff Amore from Rutgers, because Alabama's rim protection was its biggest flaw last year. And I've talked to Nate Oates about this. I firmly believe that the team that Nate Oates had in 2021 with Herb Jones and John Petty and the team he had in 2023 with Brandon Miller were better teams than last year's team that went to the Final Four, but last year's team broke through. I mean, Cliff Amore last year blocked 93 shots at Rutgers. That is more than half of what Alabama blocked as a team last season. So rim protection is obviously going to go up in a major way, and that's one of the primary reasons why Alabama now is in position, in my opinion, to go back to a Final Four and this time win a national championship.
Yeah, John, one thing that is very important for national championship caliber teams are under the radar guys that we potentially did not see coming in the preseason. One of my favorite series from your Twitter is your buy stock now, you're under the radar.
Yeah.
Who is your SEC? Maybe you can categorize them as a my guy type of buy stock now player that SEC fans should have on their radars going into the season.
So you're saying player now, you're not saying team.
Player.
Now, do you want this guy to be a transfer? Do you want him to be in the program the year prior? Like, how are you, separating this? Because there's a lot of layers to the way I kind of evaluate titles in the preseason. I don't want to go off brand here.
Would never want that. Let's go with a returning guy, maybe a breakout, someone that could be a familiar name, maybe not, but a guy on an SEC roster that was here last year that we're going to be seeing big things from this year.
Well, I'm going to tie this into my SEC sleeper pick because I think Georgia under Mike White is a sneaky good team this year, and that's obviously directly related to what I think is going to be a big-time year for Silas Demery. I look at what Georgia brings back from a team that, again, advanced pretty far in the NIT You have Silas Demery back, who I think eventually will morph into an all-SEC caliber guard. Blue Kane is also back. Now, that's obviously the returning pieces. I also, though, look at what Georgia did recruiting-wise. Tyron Lawrence is a proven power conference starter. He comes over for Vanderbilt. Guys, in the NCAA tournament, I was fortunate enough to work the first four, and then I worked the Memphis regional where Clemson was, or the Memphis first-round site where Clemson was. And R.J. Godfrey was a part of that Clemson run to the Elite Eight. Great utility player, can play multiple positions, can defend multiple positions. He's a potential starter for Georgia. Then on top of that, you add Ace Newell, one of the best high school players in the country. You add Santos Cyril, who, again, as we know, was supposed to play for John Calipari at Kentucky. I think if you really want to get in the weeds right here, I think Georgia is a sneaky good team in the SEC. I think if you split the atom on Georgia, the Bulldogs look like a potential bubble team.
John, you went to the a great transition, because John Calipari was the next one I was going to ask you about, and obviously we've been talking about Arkansas a lot this offseason, and really just the expectations for the roster that he's built there, because John made the joke at the initial. He's like, I went and just talked to my team. I don't have a team, but now he does have a team, and it's a very talented team, just as you would expect, with sort of the way the roster shapes up. What are your expectations? I know you had Arkansas at number 2 in your SEC offseason breakdown, but just your overall expectations, maybe potential strengths. I mean, that front court is loaded. Guard plays fantastic, but what are some things you see with this team going into next season?
The biggest thing I look at is this. When I started doing this, guys, 20 years ago, John Calipari was the head coach at Memphis, and the backbone of his teams was really the DNA of teams that got after you defensively, teams that made it uncomfortable for you to run their offense. I remember his teams at Memphis. People want to talk about, obviously, Derrick Rose and Tyreek Evans, but guys like Antonio Anderson, Robert Dozier, guys who weren't maybe the best players on the team, but who really set the tone defensively. Everybody wants to talk about the players that came from Kentucky, and I understand that, via the portal. Everybody wants to talk about the freshmen. But Kentucky's loss, obviously, I think was Arkansas's gain, in the sense that John Calipari quietly, in my opinion, in recruiting, got back to the DNA of what we saw at Memphis by adding Jonas Adu and by adding, John L. Davis from Florida Atlantic. Now, you are adding 2 proven defensive commodities. I mean, I think you guys would agree. Jonas, Adu, and his rim protection was, critical in Tennessee, getting very close to the Final Four. Nelly Davis is a player who, again, was a part of a Florida Atlantic team 2 years ago that got to a Final Four. So with those players, you're adding 2 guys who, again, are proven defensive-minded players. So if you think about those 2 guys as part of the fabric of your projected starting 5, and then you add Trevin Brazile, who, again, I think we all thought before his ACL injury a couple of years ago was going to be an all-conference caliber player. And then you look at the makeup of that backcourt with DJ Wagner, a year older, and you think about some of the other guys that are there. I really want to pose this question to everybody out there. How would we feel about Arkansas's roster if Arkansas wasn't painted across the front of the chest and Kentucky was?
Yeah.
Because I think people would be talking about them if they're a top 10 team, and I think they look like a top 10 team.
That's a fantastic point. And John, this question might tie in, it might not. But I'm going the route of coaching here. Now, a lot of times when a team's very good, assistant coach leaves, they fall off a little bit. The next year, we look back and we're like, well, he was kind of the defensive coordinator, or he kind of constructed the whole offense type of deal. This year now, any incoming retaining assistant coaches, someone that's left, where you think, man, this is really going to impact this team in an XYZ fashion leading into this season?
You're talking from a tactical perspective.
Yes.
Well, I mentioned Georgia as a sleeper because, we're really getting into the weeds, but you think about the experience that Ole Miss has, that many fifth-year players, obviously led by Matthew Morrell, led by Jamin Brakefield, who, again, started his college career at Duke. and then you start to think about the fact that Mark Adams is now reunited with Chris Beard. They were the duo that was together when Texas Tech came within inches of winning a national title in 2019. This is, to me, another team that not a lot of people are talking about, but a team that could be a major, major player in the SEC, because you start thinking now about the makeup of what they have going on. They've definitely fortified their front line by adding, Malik Dia, Mikhail Brown-Jones from UNC Greensboro. So they're in a situation where they are rectifying, I think, some of their deficiencies from last year. And they also have, as you know, Sean Padula, who has tons of seasoning from his time at Virginia Tech, where he had the ball in his hands. And the makeup of the team, as you know, feels a lot like the Texas Tech team that went really, really far in the 2019 NCAA tournament. I'm not saying Ole Miss is going to go to the Final Four, but I'm looking at this squad and I'm seeing the fact that you have an all-conference caliber player back in Matthew Morrell. You also added Dre Davis from Seton Hall, who's an older player who was a part of a team that won the postseason NIT. Ole Miss is a team, guys, that is built to go to the NCAA tournament and be a nuisance to play once it gets there. This is the interesting thing, I think, that's happening right now in the SEC. Because we have a little bit of a passage at Kentucky with so many new faces at the flagship program in the conference, you have all of these other teams that have older, capable rosters that are going, to my opinion, make major, major jumps. I say to people all the time, you might be in a situation where you could finish 4th or 5th in the SEC this year and make the Final Four.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the truth. I mean, again, and that's what we've talked about. You can look at all the projections in terms of double-digit NCAA tournament teams this year, and it's not even just that. You could look at 12 teams in the league feel like that they're in a position to go to the tournament, and we're looking up in February, right? And you've still got that many teams that are right there in the mix. But John, to follow up on that with Kentucky, because obviously, as you would expect, we have probably the most Arkansas and Kentucky fans of any fan base in terms of basketball right now. And just again, I know it's so interesting to ask this question because we know every year now it's different. To where, you're rebuilding your roster every single season, where it used to be, what's the future of the program? But really, it's what's the future of this year's roster.
Right.
As you look at what Mark Pope put together, Max and I have talked about the shooting that they brought in. You bring in some experienced guards and Kirk Risa, and, Jackson Robinson comes back and all that. What do you like about this Kentucky roster, and what do you see as maybe some potential things, not necessarily weaknesses, but what are your biggest questions maybe for this roster heading into the season?
The positive you hit on, the shooting, the skill level, the spacing that obviously Kentucky can provide. Mark Pope has proven to be a fantastic offensive coach, but you're also looking at a team that has never played together before. You're looking at a coach that has never had this caliber of job. Now, he did a fantastic job in the Big 12 last year as one of the surprise teams, but now he's stepping into the gladiator pit as the head coach of Kentucky. Kentucky is going to be, in my opinion, an NCAA tournament team. I don't know if it's a top 25 team yet to start next season. There's too much uncertainties. And the weight class isn't just going to be a change for Mark Pope. It's going to be a change for a number of players in this program. Amari Williams from Drexel broke Twitter when he committed to Kentucky, but he also played in the CAA last year, and his team didn't make the NCAA tournament. Lamont Butler from San Diego State, the hero from the 2023 Final Four, great veteran in the Mountain West. Now you're playing at Rupp Arena. Kirk Risa played at Arizona in big games, was on a West Virginia team last year that was one of the worst in power conference basketball. Then you think about Kobe Brea, part of an NCAA tournament team at Dayton. Terrific shooter. Now he's going from the Atlantic 10 to the SEC, which could put 10 teams in the NCAA tournament. And this is something, guys, I think that is a byproduct of the time we're living in. Years ago, most of recruiting, not to say that there were no transfers, but most of recruiting was done via the high school route. So what would happen was there would be an announcement at a press conference or whatever in October, November. Somebody would sign a letter of intent, and that would be it. Now, because so much recruiting is done via the portal and because of social media, we automatically think that just because there's volume, that team's going to be really, really good. That is not obviously a guarantee just because a team is getting commitments that it's going to lead to obviously a really successful season. I think it's more of a byproduct of the time that we're in right now. But think about the hurdles that are in front of Kentucky. And I talk to people about this all the time. Just because a team wears a certain name across its chest does not mean that that team is automatically going to be one of the best in its league or the best in college basketball. I mean, you just look right now at what's going on in the SEC, and this is off the top of my head right now. Alabama, consensus top 5 team, consensus threat to win a national championship. Arkansas, we've went through. John Calipari has not performed well in the NCAA tournament the last couple of years. I think everybody would tell you that. But he has had Kentucky consistently at the top of the SEC. And to me, his roster this season at Arkansas is comparable to what he's had at Kentucky. Texas A&M, nobody is really talking about. I had them in the NCAA tournament last year against Houston. Wade Taylor back. Manny Obaseki back. Solomon Washington back defensively like a queen on a chessboard. He can go anywhere. Then Henry Coleman's back. Who did they add in the transfer portal? A starter at the 5 in Pharrell Payne. They've rectified that. Anderson Garcia is back, one of the best glue guys in college basketball. They add C.J. Wiltshire. They add Zurich Phelps from SMU. That team is a dark horse that nobody's talking about. And what do we always talk about? Retention needs more attention. They've retained. You have to put Auburn in the equation at the top of the league with a first-team All-American in Janai Broome. That's 4 teams. Tennessee lost players, but still has Zakai Ziegler, still has Jermaine Mashack, still has enough, did nicely in the portal by getting Felix Okpara to replace Jonas Adu. And then Florida is also a team that's going to have an all-SEC first-team caliber candidate in Walter Clayton Jr. That's 6 teams right there. Ole Miss is 7. I haven't even mentioned one of the biggest brands in the sport in Texas, who, again, we're looking at it right now just based on talent. Jordan Pope from Oregon State, Trey Johnson, 5-star prospect, Tremont Mark, proven scorer, Arthur Kaluma, proven scorer, Caden Shedrick, proven college big man. That's 8 teams that we just went to before Kentucky. We haven't mentioned Chris Jans, the dentist out of Michigan State. We haven't mentioned Georgia, and we haven't mentioned Lamont Paris in South Carolina. That's a dozen out of the 16 SEC teams right now, and I think you guys would agree all 12 of those teams will enter the season with legitimate hopes of making the NCAA tournament. But you guys know as well as I do, this is only September.
Listen, John, and you know what? You could even add Missouri, who I know went over last year. Trust me, everybody's given me a lot about that because I've been the Dennis Gates hype man for years. It worked out in year 1. I followed his career at Cleveland State, talked to him a lot there. But, like, even they bring in a Mark Mitchell, right? And they've revamped their entire roster. Yeah, like Perkins comes in. So
Caleb Grill is back.
I mean, it is – Max, go ahead. I know you want to follow up on the Texas A&M love, I'm sure, because Max is the resident Texas A&M hype man this offseason. He loves this team for Buzz Williams.
I would say Texas A&M is a dark horse Final Four team.
Yeah.
Dark horse.
Oh my gosh.
Dark horse Final Four team.
John, we have a weekly show, and I have a bold prediction that this is going to be Buzz's best team ever. I have been saying over this offseason, I don't think there's anyone out there that's higher on Texas A&M than me, but I might have just met my maker here. So yeah, I'm all in on the Aggies this year. I absolutely love that team. And I'm going to stay on the topic of trying to make the tournament, and I'm going to kind of shift into a little bit of scheduling here.
Okay.
Specifically non-conference, because Alabama, their non-conference last year was
insane.
Yes, exactly. And we're kind of seeing Auburn do that again now this year.
Yeah.
But we also saw, now this is not SEC, but a team like Iowa State just crush teams by 75 points every game, and their net looks great. This is more of an opinionated question, but with how conferences are expanding, tournaments are expanding and whatnot, this non-conference is as important as ever. What's your take on the route teams are going in the non-conference nowadays?
I have always been an advocate that your NCAA tournament resume and seed should be predicated on who did you play, where did you play them, did you win or lose? And what I mean by that is marquee wins to me are always the backbone of a really strong resume, and bad losses are obviously the detriment of a very poor resume. Now, with that said, I understand there's different metrics and different things that go into seeding teams and so on and so forth. But I also have to, and we all do, we have to abide by what the selection committee is going to use in terms of the criteria in seeding the NCAA tournament. What Auburn is doing this year, I've been doing this, guys, 20 years. It's one of the craziest non-conference schedules that I've ever seen in my life. I mean, to think about that, Auburn's going to play Ohio State and Atlanta, going to play Purdue and Birmingham, going to Duke as well, and playing in Cameron Indoor Stadium as part of the ACC-SEC Challenge. Auburn is also, as we know, going to be in the Maui Invitational, which features an opening round game against Iowa State. And then they're also going to be in a situation where if you win that game, you're going to play North Carolina. It is without question the best non-conference schedule in college basketball. And frankly, guys, I don't even think it's close.
Yeah, I agree with you. And again, we've kind of talked about just the scheduling in the SEC, and I think that's, you go back to.
And I left out a game the first weekend of the season against Houston.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, the SEC since 2016, the late Mike's Live, they made a commitment. They wanted to start playing tougher schedules, and we've seen teams adopt that. But Max, I will let you finish this up. Jon has been gracious with his time, and I know, Max, you wanted to take this in a food direction as the New York native that you are, Max Barr. So I will let you have this before we wrap up with Jon.
I think this is the first time with the company I finally have a New York native on the show with me here. So, Jon, there's going to be a boatload of Kentucky fans that storm into New York City the weekend of December 21st for the Champions Classic. What is your recommendation for, one, a New York slice?
Okay.
But then, two, a New York deli, because there is nothing like a solid New York bread and deli sandwich.
I mean, a New York slice, I would do Cassiano's on, I believe it's 55th and 3rd. You get a regular slice and then like a drunk grandma slice. It's a Sicilian with like vodka sauce. It's to die for. And then if you're coming to New York City, I would get on the subway and I would just go to Katz's to get the full New York experience. Love the roast turkey there.
Max, are you satisfied?
Yeah, I was going to follow up. Jon, are you ever traveling up to Albany this year? Or are you going to go through upstate New York, maybe on the way to Buffalo?
I usually go to Syracuse every year, but I just fly up and back in the same day for that. Why? What's on your mind, Max?
Grew up in Binghamton, New York.
Okay.
Try Nurchi's. It's a square slice, a little bit doughy if you don't like that, but the class of Binghamton pizza, Nurchi's.
Yeah, but the class of Binghamton pizza could be like, the winner of the CBI.
That is also true.
Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
There's a nice Italian influence there, Jon.
Okay. Pizza in upstate New York. I went to college in Ithaca, so you kind of learn after a while. Pizza in upstate New York, you should save your calories.
Cortland,
okay.
There. Yep.
Fair enough. And on that note,
I'm just an SEC country in Nashville.
Right.
So
Nashville, the Gulf, love it.
Yeah, guys. Jon, thanks so much. We appreciate you joining us. We've been wanting to do this for a while. You've been gracious with your time. Hopefully, we can catch up with you again down the road.
All right, guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jon.